The thing that really compelled me to get into the work of developing is to make sustainable architecture more affordable. And truly sustainable architecture has to be affordable. Economics is a key pillar of sustainability. So my new mantra is form follows financing. As an architect, the architects out there all appreciate, form follows function is always the old mantra, but my new mantra is form follows financing, because you learn very quickly as a developer that form really does follow what you can finance.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, I'm joined by Dylan Lamar, architect, developer, and founder of the firm Cultivate. Dylan talks about his experience creating accessible, high-performance homes through innovative, community-based approaches. When I was first getting into the real estate industry, I absorbed just about every real estate investing book I could get my hands on. Investing, these books said, is a numbers game with no room for emotion. In order to be successful, you must buy low and sell high. Or if you're renting a property, then the income must exceed expenses and the debt payment. Let the pro forma guide your decision-making process. At that time, real estate became my world. It was so new that it was the only thing that I could think about or talk about. After reading each book and listening to each podcast, it felt like I was getting handed the keys to a kingdom in the form of financial literacy. The game was about the numbers, and finally, I was starting to understand how to play the game. But I'm here to tell you, many years later, that game is flawed. That game doesn't like to talk about the shadow side. It doesn't like to acknowledge that it is fraught with inequities and externalities. It has few explanations of why the wealth gap is getting larger and larger. It doesn't explain why home affordability is slipping out of the hands of so many, or why our environment is getting plundered and toxified. We're living in an era where we don't have the luxury of ignorance to simply say we need to increase supply to create more affordable housing. We no longer have the time to have sustainable and healthy housing be exclusive for only the privileged. Because I'm here to tell you that until we can create attainable housing that does not come at the expense of life on this planet, then we are all in for a rough ride where money will not have much use. That's why I'm excited to have Dylan Lamar join me, because I deeply admire the work that Dylan has committed himself to. Dylan's background in high-performance architectural design is steeped in passive house knowledge on how to build in ways in which we don't need to consume much energy to heat or cool our buildings. But like others will empathize with, an architect is usually beholden to the visions of their clients. For Dylan, in order to build what he thought the world needed, it wasn't about convincing a client on his ideas. No, Dylan chose to be the client and to step into the shoes of a developer. In this conversation, we specifically talk about his experience creating a cooperative-based community housing land trust. Now, that might be a mouthful and these structures may be new to you, but you should definitely start to pay attention because it won't be the last time you hear of them. Community housing land trusts are growing extremely fast, not only in this country, but across the world. To give you some context before we get into the conversation, a cooperative is a type of ownership structure. This is different than, say, a single-family home where the ownership is held fee simple, meaning the bundle of rights or the deed to the property is held by one owner that makes all the decisions. Now, a condominium is different as well. It's where people own their own units and there's a homeowner association that manages the property. A cooperative, on the other hand, is a legal entity in which member owners own shares, but not the individual units. Now, let's add the community housing land trust part onto it. This is a structure that takes it even further because this is where the land is decoupled from the improvements on the property, such as the buildings. Why is this important? Well, it's because by bringing the land back into the commons, it's no longer a commodity with a cost that perpetually goes up because of inflation and appreciation. So now the cost of ownership is greatly reduced because whenever someone buys in, they're just buying the share or the home and not the land. And you can go even further. You can actually de-commodify the home itself, or the shares in this case, to create permanent affordability. This way, it's not just the first owner that receives the benefit of affordable housing, but each owner thereafter in perpetuity. The result, as you're about to hear, is a real game changer. Well, Dylan, thank you so much for agreeing to come on to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast. It's a pleasure to have you here. Where I think it'd be really fun to start out is not what you're doing right now in your architectural and development work, but really where you came from and where you grew up.
Oh, sure. I'm from Arkansas, kind of a medium-sized city near Memphis, Tennessee. Couldn't wait to leave there for the most part, my entire youth growing up. Ended up going through engineering school and ended up in architecture school. Moved out here, finished a master's at the University of Oregon in sustainable architecture, and practiced sustainable architecture in Portland for about 8 or 10 years. And what kind of got me to where I am now is just seeing how little affordability there was to sustainable architecture and really wanting to try and change that dynamic. And so that led me into the becoming a developer. To basically try and develop the projects that I wasn't having clients come to me to hire me to design. At heart, I want to be designing these things, but I just felt like, okay, there's a need to innovate and figure out how to make more of these projects happen. That's a very quick overview.
That was a quick overview, and I want to rewind the tape a little bit because I want to go to the part where first, what really interested you in architecture? Why that route over engineering, law, medicine, or anything else?
Yeah. I focused in structural engineering in my undergrad, finished a civil engineering degree with a focus on structures. And when you're in high school, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was pretty good at math and science, so engineering seemed to make sense. I liked practical stuff. So, fast forward by last year of engineering school, I just kind of knew I was in the wrong place, just culturally. I realized I was not going to be happy just crunching numbers for other projects. I realized I wanted to have some control over what I was creating in the world. And so that kind of the natural step there was, to go to more school, to take a pay cut, to become an architect. Can't tell you how many conversations I had with befuddled professors wondering what the hell I was doing. But, I never regretted it for a day. Really enjoyed architecture, and originally went to the University of Illinois for a master's there. They have a really good joint program that marries the world of structural engineering with architecture. It turns out I didn't realize, but that program is really meant to churn out designers for high rises in Chicago. And that was really not at all what I was interested in architecturally. But I did have the fortune of taking a design class with Katrine Klingenberg, who is now the director of Passive House Institute US. And she introduced me to Passive House, and that was really my major jump into the world of sustainability. Before that time, I didn't really realize you could just focus on sustainable architecture as a profession. And yeah, I dove headlong into that and ended up working on the first passive house project in America alongside Katrine, and became kind of a passive house consultant, trained in Germany, and was really doing that consulting while I was still in school. But it was just really fascinating to me, and I just took to it. I then transferred to school. Well, I took a pause, went to South America for a year, traveled around, and then went back to the University of Oregon to finish the master's. Took some straw bale building class and Adobe building classes in Argentina, which were really fun, and kind of, again, trying to explore the breadth of what it means to be sustainable. And I'm now back in, stick framed land.
What a fun venture though, between like really high performance passive house and really low tech, centuries old sustainable design.
Totally. I still dream of building a straw bale passive house. It could be a beautiful marriage of high performance, low carbon.
So I know after graduating from architecture school, you ended up in Portland working for Greenhammer. And for anybody listening that's not familiar with Greenhammer, the founder, Stefan, was on, I think, episode 3. I could be wrong about that, but Stefan has such an incredible background and is an incredible entrepreneur in his own right with what he's done with that company. But yeah, what were those years like of really working on, I would say, sustainable design and beautiful architecture, but still like very early to develop what is a growing but still niche market?
Yeah, it was definitely a good home. I learned from 2 or 3 really great architects that also came through there. And it was a wonderful collaboration. It was wonderful to really working at a design build company, different from working at just a straight architecture firm. I really got a heavy grounding in reality from the day one. Budget was always a part of our conversations, and I really appreciate that kind of pragmatism. It just made me a much better designer. And after finishing my master's at the University of Oregon, I kind of published a small book called Urbanize and Insulate that came out of my master's work there, taking the 2 ideas of we need to live in more urban walkable neighborhoods as an aspect of sustainability. So kind of the town planning scale of sustainability married with the insulate part, the passive house, the technicalities of an actual building. And Greenhammer, working with Stefan, he was really a sponge for that research, and he really supported me and the whole firm in taking our work in that direction. The first major project we did in that vein was Ankeny Row, which is a collection of 7 townhouses around a courtyard in Southeast Portland, really contributing to the walkable neighborhood that was already established there. And then we kind of scaled up to Tillamook Row a few years later, doing 16 courtyard apartments. And those were really dream projects for me. I really loved, getting my hands dirty with those. Everything from the technicalities of actually building a very low carbon building to the, more town planning, streetscape kind of planning scale. And I continue to really try to want to repeat those projects as a developer now and try to make more of those projects happen. I mean, still to this day, we finished Ankeny, I think 10 years ago now. And to this day, they're kind of boutique projects. They definitely get developed with more frequency, but they're still nowhere near kind of the bread and butter of American housing. And I think they really need to be.
It's fun hearing about these projects I had an office on Burnside right around the corner from Ankeny Row.
Okay.
And was good friends with Mark Ingberg, who developed essentially the mixed-use commercial neighborhood just to the west of Ankeny Row. And to see the kind of contrast and how it comes together with a very walkable inner courtyard immersive experience was so fun to watch that come together. But why do you think that that's still not? Well, you said it's happening a little bit more frequently, but what do you think is holding that back locally and nationally?
Yeah, I mean, zoning laws for sure are the central kind of hang up. They're starting in Oregon. We now statewide have upzoned to allow a diversity of middle housing types. but most of the country is still, single family zoning or something high density. And we just cut out everything in the middle. And so the work of changing zoning laws is a decades long effort. And I think we're just starting to see the trend turn from exclusion into these two camps of low density or high density and nothing in between. And we're starting to trend back toward, okay, we realize we actually made some mistakes there, especially if we want to talk honestly about diversity, equity, and inclusion in our neighborhoods. We've got to re-invite the middle into the conversation. And, that's, again, in Oregon, that's happening in a lot of cities. They're starting to relook at those zoning laws, but it's going to take a while to come around. So the zoning laws is the key piece, but then you also have the whole building industry that's built around the zoning laws. The Home Builders Association, they really have spent decades now honing in on developing low density suburbs. And they know how to do that really well. There's many businesses built around that model, and you can't just change that overnight. It takes a while to see that shift toward new opportunities. And that's where I see myself as a small player. The benefit of being small is I'm very agile and I can jump in where I see a niche opportunity, develop a project, and hopefully work as a catalyst to help spur innovation.
So you jumped from working for Green Hammer to create your own firm. Was it Cultivate right away, or was there another iteration that I might not be aware of?
Yeah, no, jumped straight from Green Hammer to Cultivate and have been slowly building this business. The luxury of wearing a lot of hats is I have a diversity of ways I can make money. And at any given time, I can, kind of move where I have a good gig. And that's allowed me some freedom to slowly move into development. I didn't have to right away make my living off of being a developer. So I've been able to kind of dip a toe in the water, test it out here and there. I started pretty small with just developing a tiny house as a fundraiser for a local temple, and learned a lot, had a lot of fun. And from there, kind of moved into C Street, figured out how to bring social investors together to create a construction fund to build a project, learned about housing cooperatives through the nonprofit I had partnered with, Square One Villages. So kind of a lot of experimentation that it can be pretty risky, right? Like you can really lose your shirt just not understanding all the risks involved in a project. So I've been very slow and meticulous to make sure that I don't do that. And so far, knock on wood, I've come on the winning side of things.
Yeah, we have a lot of real estate professionals in some capacity listen to this show, and it seems like a lot of people, they know they want to direct their careers towards controlling their own project. They have a vision and they want to see it created, but if they're an architect or an engineer or designer or whatever it is, they're at the mercy of somebody else. And so creating that intentionality and that leap to doing that, I think, conversations like this helps to give agency to people to let them know, like, there's a couple different ways that you can put this together, especially one that's not so risky in terms of development projects take a long time. And there's a lot of different ways that it gets put together, and it doesn't immediately translate to food on the table, though.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to pick up a couple different themes there and really try to tie them together. And it relates to just what time you think it is right now and how that relates to the work that you're pursuing. You mentioned affordability and diversity, equity, and inclusion and sustainability. But I wonder if there's a way in which, like, we can take maybe one of these example projects of like the C Street and really explore how that came together and why you started to work towards a cooperative and affordable model rather than spec market rate, but still highly sustainable and beautiful and all that. What was pushing you in that direction?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the thing that really compelled me to get into the work of development work is is to make sustainable architecture more affordable. And truly sustainable architecture has to be affordable. The economics is a key pillar of sustainability. So I knew affordability was my number one goal from the outset. Doing your first project of any size it takes a lot of conversations to try to convince a lot of people to believe that you have the skills to make it successful. There's always a lot of money on the line, so there's always a lot of risk. And luckily, I found a good partner in Square One Villages, a local nonprofit. And they really brought to my attention the housing cooperative model. It's a model that they have been endorsing, specifically limited equity cooperatives, which is a unique form of home ownership that has been around a long time. There's a lot of them in New York City and Boston and a lot of East Coast cities. I didn't really understand the history, but cooperatives were really the original form of shared ownership and have been around since the 1800s. And so cooperatives were kind of the original form of shared ownership, and condos really only came about starting in the 1950s. So it's an interesting history that condos really came to the fore, and it's certainly in the West Coast over co-ops. And there's basically that comes down to condos are easier to finance than co-ops are, and that's financing really. My new mantra, I've got to plug this sometime in this podcast. My new mantra is form follows financing. As an architect, the architects out there all appreciate, form follows function is always the old mantra, but my new mantra is form follows financing, because you learn very quickly as a developer that form really does follow what you can finance. And I think real estate agents probably really understand that, because you guys are knee deep in that kind of, those kind of dynamics. But for architects, we kind of get trained thinking that everybody just wants beautiful buildings. And then we hit our heads against reality and realize that, there's all these other things you have to take into account. So anyway, I digress. Yeah, so cooperatives kind of came to the table through my work with Square One and limited equity cooperatives. I realized so much of, certainly in the last decade, when we've just seen this staggering appreciation in real estate values when it comes to housing. And a lot of this dates back to Reagan era financial policy decisions about the kind of opened stock market speculation into the real estate market. There used to be a pretty clear divide between those worlds, but that all through deregulation, that has led to a lot of speculative investment in the real estate world that didn't used to exist. And that's really, it's turned our housing into a commodity. That's fine if there's plenty of housing to go around and, the prices aren't jumping by a crazy amount. But when you have paired with that dynamic, low density zoning that's artificially suppressing the creation of housing and causing demand to rise and supply to dwindle, you've created this really perfect storm where you get the extremely rapidly growing housing prices that we have today. So in that context, limited equity co-ops are really a tool to work against that kind of rampant appreciation value that's great for homeowners, existing homeowners, but it's awful for anyone who hasn't been able to buy their own house yet. And it really often means many people are being locked into a lifetime of rentership right now. They have no prospect of ever owning. And what that means is it's not just that they're missing out in economic stability, they're also facing a lifetime of getting displaced, because eventually you're likely not going to be able to afford rent in your neighborhood anymore, and you're going to have to move further and further out or to a different city altogether. I happen to be a landlord of a couple of properties right now, and I'm seeing that dynamic with my current tenants. One just moved to a town about 30 minutes away because they just couldn't afford anything locally. So limited equity co-ops, I can kind of jump into that topic if you'd like.
I would, and I want to make a brief interjection about where I see the conversation in real estate is so often dominated by wealth generation. And it's true for those people that have been fortunate to be housed and to be building equity by paying down debt and rising inflation and appreciation. It's been a really powerful catalyst. But whenever we are talking about who it doesn't serve, like, it's not just they're missing out on equity and wealth generation, they're missing out on dignity. And that's where I really see the need for housing land trust and different ways to talk about this than just how do we provide affordable housing, because there's not a lot of sovereignty and dignity that comes out of just like, this is a math equation only. And one of the reasons why I've appreciated the mentorship with Ross Chapin so much is like, what is some of these structures that we can start to play with right-sized living and different construction types, and now really seeing you take a project like this, that, you know, you've got the sustainable side, then you're layering in this needed complexity of, well, how do we iterate something that isn't working for, and let's face it, a lot of people these days, that there's never going to be that access to homeownership.
Yeah.
But we haven't fully introduced, for probably a lot of people that have never even heard of a cooperative. How about we start there, and then why don't you layer in the limited equity part and what comes along with that? Was, I'm sure that's where your nonprofit, I guess they are the land trust. Is that the model that you went down?
Yeah.
And how that works together.
Yeah. So housing cooperatives have been around since the 1800s. About 75% of the multifamily buildings in New York City are currently owned as housing cooperatives. And areas where it exists and where it has historically developed, it's everybody understands it. It's the banks there understand it. They've been around for decades, if not centuries. So, but it's, talk to any Oregonian and they'd have no idea what you're talking about, right? Because we've got, I think, 2 or 3 in the state. But essentially, cooperatives are just you can think of them a little bit like an LLC. It's a pretty similar ownership structure to an LLC. You just happen to own housing with that. And with your share that you own, you have the right to occupy one of the units. And so, if there's 10 owners of a building, you are 1/10 owner of the whole thing. It's a little different from a condo. If you're one of 10 owners in a condo association, you own the airspace within your dwelling unit plus 1/10 of the commons. What that means, and it doesn't sound all that different, but what that means in practice is the bank has a physical thing they can foreclose on in a condo, whereas with a co-op, they don't. They can only foreclose on a piece of paper that says you're a shareholder, and that might be worthless to them. So that's just a little aside there about why condos kind of supplanted co-ops generally. But, I'm pretty agnostic about condos versus co-ops, although there's a lot of historical examples of how co-ops create very socially beneficial situations for people. They definitely, because you're one shareholder of the entire thing, it definitely tends toward a more socially cohesive ownership group than with a condo where this is mine and keep out everybody else kind of a mentality. So I definitely see the benefits of that. And I think I would love to kind of explore that through my career. But right now I'd say I'm pretty agnostic. My goal continues to be just what's the pathway to the most affordable housing, to develop the most affordable housing. So that's kind of co-ops. And there's a subset of housing cooperatives called limited equity cooperatives, which also have existed for a long time. And there are also limited equity condos. So the limited equity piece is not unique to cooperatives. It just happens to have been housed in that framework more frequently and with longer history than anywhere else. So again, there's a lot in New York City. And what a limited equity co-op does is it's a tool to create permanently affordable housing. It's just like any other cooperative, except that there's a little clause in the bylaws that says your housing value, essentially your resale value of your share, is limited to, say, 3 to 5% appreciation per year. And by limiting how much you can turn around and sell your unit for, you ensure that for the lifetime of that structure, there's going to be a cap on what you can sell for. that cap tends to be less than the general market appreciation value, and therefore it remains permanently affordable in the community. It's interesting, though, it could start on day one as a market rate development, but then track over time to become more and more affordable as well. So there's kind of different ways you can strategize it. It's a pretty customizable thing in the end of the day. That said, I would say most limited equity cooperatives do need some form of subsidy from the outset to get started, and either subsidy in the form of like a grant or a low-income housing tax credit, which doesn't work really well for co-ops, unfortunately, or some kind of lower interest financing that's not available to the public market. But the benefit of that permanent affordability obviously is independent of who's living there. That unit of housing will be permanently available to the community as an affordable housing unit. And that's huge because most affordable housing that gets developed in our current affordable housing industry, it's only affordable for 20 or 30 years. And then the limitations go away and it usually reverts to market rate unless there's another infusion of subsidy. So it's really kind of a crappy model, it's a ton of work to create affordable housing. And it takes, the affordable housing developers, I feel for them, they fight an uphill battle with every project. And to do that, but not lock in permanent affordability just is such a shame. So I think that is one way that limited equity cooperatives could help steer the affordable housing industry writ large in a more sustainable direction.
How does it work, Dylan, where you're the developer, you're essentially getting a construction loan, I would imagine, unless you brought in other financial means. But how does it work where you're taking the construction loan and putting it into permanent financing? Is it the same process as a market rate development?
It depends. I'm nowhere near, churning out the number of projects to say this is my pathway and this is how I do it. I'm still in that kind of exploratory phase, I would say, of just trying to suss out what is going to be the best long-term pathway. But what we did with the C Street Co-op is I did partner with Square One kind of from day one, knowing that we wanted to do a limited equity co-op. That really quickly narrowed the range of possibilities. There's maybe one or two co-ops in all of Oregon. There's a few manufactured housing co-ops. That actually is where limited equity co-ops are making the biggest inroads right now in the state. And I think that's true in most other states as well. But knowing that we wanted to develop a limited equity co-op meant, okay, there's no bank that's going to give us this construction loan, probably, because they just don't have any idea what a co-op is. And to convince them to lend, construction loan's a pretty risky loan because you don't have anything the bank can turn around and foreclose on if you go bankrupt halfway through construction. So banks really are very careful about construction loans. So for that reason, we went locally and found private individuals who were willing to lend money. And so we worked with those social impact investors. They provided 100% of the construction funds. So we, with 100% social impact investors, built the project. And then through Square One's relationship with Summit Bank locally, a local portfolio lender, they agreed to do the permanent loan. And they kind of thankfully were willing, because of their long-term relationship with Square One, they were willing to take the time to learn what a co-op is, what were the risks for them as a bank and lending to them. Other than the construction loan coming from 100% private money, after it was built, getting the permanent mortgage is a pretty conventional process. We just went to a bank, got that loan. I will say, though, because of the gap between appraisal value and actual project cost, which is pretty common in smaller residential housing projects, we did need some gap financing. And for that, we again went to the social impact investors, and for around 6% interest rate, we had them keep some of their money in for 10 years, and they'll get paid monthly from the co-op to get back that below market return. And that was really necessary just because we had that gap between the actual cost of the project versus what the bank would lend on. So it definitely took some creativity in figuring out how to make it work. But as I understand it, that's pretty par for the course for most development work. It's just like the economics are always changing, and having to kind of reposition and pull from one place and push in another to make the deal happen. My understanding is that's pretty par for the course for development work.
How do people buy a share that translates to a house ultimately?
So we developed the project with the LLC of social investors, and we sold to the cooperative, which in the case of C Street, we have 7 owners. Those 7 owners applied through Square One Villages, the partnering nonprofit, and applied to live there essentially. And they applied to become owners in the co-op. And Square One was really instrumental in forming the cooperative, educating all those applicants in what a co-op is and what it means to live there. For the first year, they have been attending monthly co-op meetings to help facilitate and kind of moderate discussions and steer the ship in the right direction from the get-go. But essentially in this case, and I think it's true of most limited equity co-op developments, there's a nonprofit that's involved that aspiring owners apply through. And then they bought into the co-op with a $10,000 purchase price. There was some added assistance for folks that was too much of a financial reach. Square One was able to make some small loans to them to make that possible. And then once they had bought that $10,000 share purchase, they are an owner. And then they have monthly costs that include paying off the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, and then maintenance reserves, things for, putting away a little money each month to help eventually fix the roof, that kind of thing. But total monthly costs are well below market averages. They have small 1-bedroom suites, and each of those is less than $800 a month total costs, including utilities, which is well below market rate for our area.
Yeah, I mean, for $10,000 and less than $800 a month, you created seven new homes. That's incredible.
Yeah.
And how does it work on the developer end? I mean, you took on a lot of risk. What is that economic reality of how you structure this from the development side?
Yeah, so the pro forma is, by the way, the pro forma is available on my website. I'm pretty open book about everything because I want to inspire more people to do this kind of work. But essentially, I get a developer fee just like any developer would. I'm a market rate developer. I don't apply for grants and things like that. So I have to make money off the projects I develop. And so, just the line in the pro forma is both an architect's fee as the architect of the project, as well as the developer's fee. And, that's just part of making all the numbers work is working my fee into the pro forma, same as dealing with all the city fees that are involved and, realtor fees, if that were part of the dynamic as well.
Interesting. And so from here, Dylan, where are you exploring? Like, what's the avenue that you're taking? You've got this project under your belt and some others, but what's really lighting you up these days?
Well, I continue to be really excited about the potential for limited equity co-ops. I worked with a local think tank called Eco Northwest, and we published a white paper, kind of a policy brief on affordable housing cooperatives in Oregon specifically. And also kind of specifically for the potential for middle housing, because we have re-legalized middle housing statewide. So that white paper's out there, and that was really enjoyable to be able to do the research and put that together. So I continue to be excited about the conversations I'm having around potential for co-ops in Oregon. I'm working now as an architect on a 70-unit limited equity co-op that Square One is developing. That one's here in Eugene as well. And they've really, C Street was their first test run of the model, but then they have a 3-acre church property that they had recently purchased. And we're now pretty close to going into construction on a 70-unit tiny house village. They've been doing tiny house villages locally, and they really have been paving, charting new pathways in that vein in affordable housing, deeply affordable housing. They're trying to target 30% AMI, which AMI means area median income. So most capital A affordable housing is targeting 60% of area median income. And this one is targeting households making just 30% of the area median income. So it really is people that are on the streets, people sleeping in their car, how to get them a more stable housing situation, and also not just get them in good housing, but have them be an owner of that housing. And so co-op system model they've been pursuing there. And so C Street was kind of a first test case for them. And now they're scaling up to 70 units. And I'm really pleased to be able to support them as the architect on that project.
Hey, this is Neil, and we're going to get back into the episode in just a second. But before we do, I want to try something out that we've never done before on this podcast. Since creating the show, we've heard how regeneration is not only possible within agriculture and farming, but also in design, construction, planning, and even finance. We've heard about how people are helping to revitalize landscapes, springboard biodiversity, create healthy homes, heal trauma, create access for all, and bring communities closer together. Now, this is not the work of large institutions and governments. It's usually small, impassioned firms and organizations working locally. And it's precisely this kind of work that I think plants the seeds of inspiration that spreads to other communities. Since the podcast is growing more each episode, I want to open up the opportunity for organizations like yours, the ones doing regenerative work, to be able to spread the word about your efforts. That's why on the podcast page of our website, we now have a way that you can record up to a 30-second voice message about the work you're doing free of charge. They'll be aired on this show and aired to our audience. To do so, visit chooselatitude.com/podcast. I can't wait to hear from you. Now let's get back to the episode. It's wild because for so long now, people have said sustainability comes at the expense of profit, and people have been trying to figure out how to iterate. How do you make these buildings more sustainable and energy efficient and less ecologically destructive? And now you're talking about people that are looking at 30% of area median income. Do you see those worlds really starting to move closer together, of that passive house world that you initially became captured with now the affordable housing world?
I guess yes and no. The optimist in me would say we're learning how to do passive house cheaper and easier, and it is becoming less and less of a reach. You know, I work as a passive house consultant nationally still, and so I see a lot of, especially multifamily passive house work across the country. And it's getting much easier. The caliber of the conversations I'm able to have with architects and builders from day one is much higher than it was, say, 5-10 years ago. So in that way, it's becoming more affordable because people understand it. It's becoming, energy codes are also ratcheting up and getting closer to passive house. So in that sense, it's becoming more normative. On the other hand, nothing like trying to set out to be your own entrepreneur to teach you a pretty hard lesson in profitability. And to have a profitable company means you're going to be competing with someone else somehow. If you're trying to move in the market, there are natural economic constraints that define how you can move and make a profit. Most people are not thinking about sustainability as a constraint, and so they're free to do the most profitable thing. If you're trying to add the lens of sustainability onto what you're trying to do, you're creating a constraint for yourself that your competitors don't have. And so to add the sustainability as a constraint on you trying to make profit in the world, it's inherently going to make it more difficult, right? Until everybody decides, all right, all we're going to do is sustainable work, then you're going to have this imbalance in your competition. So I wish more people were just honest about that look, there's never this dream oasis where sustainability is the same cost as whatever other crap we might do or build. it's always going to cost more. Now, does that mean you can't find innovative ways? We can't scale up to a point where, the delta becomes less and less. Yes, that's absolutely true. But there's always more and more we can do to be more sustainable, right? Like sustainability is that term is used in such a wide range of ways. And most of what we build is nowhere near sustainable still today. So, let's just be honest that, yeah, it's going to cost a little more. It's going to require all the stakeholders of a project to come into it, be willing to commit to that sustainability and recognize that that's a core aspect that needs to be kind of respected and funded, frankly. I would say, again, on the nice thing I'm seeing on the ground is that there's actually a lot of people with money in the bank that are very interested in supporting sustainability. And I found it not at all that difficult to find social investors who are interested in investing in the C Street Co-op. It really didn't take all that many conversations till we had the money we needed to move forward. So, and I continue to have conversations with other social investors. And my sense is there's, I think with all these retiring boomers, we have a lot of people who have profited tremendously over the last few decades. And many of them do see that the world's really facing some dire challenges and they want to move their money in ways that will make a difference. So I think it's a good time to be a developer or a real estate agent trying to move in a sustainable direction. I think just finding some creative ways of tapping into those financial resources to make it happen is the trick, because at the end of the day, the financial industry is inherently conservative. Banks are inherently conservative. And those really aren't the people you turn to when you want to be innovative and create new things. You want to turn to individuals and say, look, I have this vision and here's why I've got the credibility to execute it. And I think you should, give me $10,000 or $100,000 or whatever.
Well, that's enheartening to hear that it wasn't hard to raise those funds. What do you think about the argument of if you're dropping a sustainable or a more sustainable property into the market, now you've created this comp that other developers have to contend with whenever they go out to build another house? Do you see any validity in that, or the ability to start to move a market in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, as an energy geek, I'm pretty keen on the push to do the green appraisal kind of thing where, your standard cookie cutter appraisal starts to incorporate these sustainability aspects, and that therefore creates these comps. I think that's a wonderful direction things are moving in. I would say the challenge is that we don't have enough hard metrics that everyone understands. I would say generally the energy efficiency industry in particular in America has been really divided among all these different certification standards and different entities. And we need a centralizing force to bring them together and say, look, we need to start to agree and at least have some agreed upon metrics for how we measure some of these sustainability indicators, whether it's energy efficiency or carbon efficiency or whatnot. And right now, there's not enough regularity in how we talk about sustainability, and to be able to have your average homeowner understand the difference between having a recovery ventilation system versus not. So I think we just generally need to, as a building industry, kind of standardize the metrics of how we measure sustainability and start to codify some of these things so that market regulators and such and banks and everybody else can start to use these agreed upon metrics to measure things, and then start to have trickle down effects where actually every homeowners understand what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah, that's such a good point in an area that, coming from a sales background, where how do you take the knowledge that maybe an energy efficiency or sustainability consultant with an architecture firm to translate that for the homeowner, to then the big leap is how do you get the homeowner and that knowledge to translate towards the sales agent? And then they're talking with an appraisal, and both of them are talking about a building mainly driven on features of square footages and bedrooms and bathrooms and what the comp is down the street, to where you can't see it. Maybe it's in the walls, or maybe there's a lot of details that gets overlooked and they have no idea what that heat recovery ventilation system is. And they think it's another, like, I don't know, smoke detector in the house.
Yeah.
And so with that, because this is where I see like a hard intersection with our work, how do you think people can go about getting that fluency of understanding just where the industry is and where it's going, and getting up to the technical fluency where at least there is a normative language that we're all speaking? Like, is there one institute over another that you think is doing a really good job of that? Or like, where's the education that you think people need to be seeking out?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's a role certainly for central government to make, someone like the EPA, who of course is being highly empowered right now, right? Just having lost the much of their ability to regulate carbon emissions. So unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see a lot of leadership there. I think there's a role for the Home Builders Association to play, who historically has really fought tooth and nail against sustainability measures. It's really interesting that I found myself in being an advocate alongside them with the whole middle housing push in Oregon. I really switched. All of a sudden, they're on my team. I was like, "Oh, wait! I used to argue with you guys. We're on the same side now. This is weird. I don't know if this is right." But I think, so at the end of the day, there's also just a lot of different nonprofits and silos who have created their own energy standard and their own brand. And it's like, do we actually need another energy efficiency standard? Is that, if 50 isn't enough? I would love to see some consolidation in some of these entities to start to decide that they're going to come together rather than continue to kind of divide the market up amongst themselves. I will say FIAS has done a great job. The Passive House Institute US has done a great job of partnering with some of the national standards, such as the Department of Energy efficiency standards. So that's been cool to see. I think there's also a side of it that's just, it's going to get driven by the economics at some point. Gas is hitting over $6 a gallon in Oregon right now. And you better believe that's helping people understand the value of living in a walkable neighborhood. If that wasn't evident before, it certainly is now. And so I think when it comes to sustainability aspects around town planning, I think as those costs become more dire for folks, they're going to start to realize the value of not living in an outer suburb. Unfortunately, the people that can actually choose where they live are not generally the ones that are having financial instability in their lives. So that's not a burden that's going to be shared equitably. On the energy efficiency side, of course, if we would start pricing energy in accord with what it really costs and the environmental cost of energy, then I think we would start to respect how much insulation is in our walls and how much we're cranking up the heat to keep ourselves comfortable. These conversations have been had in America since the 70s for sure. In a lot of ways, they're age-old problems that, not to say they're not solvable, but they're a virtue of very ingrained dynamics in our world. And, it's at the end of the day, I kind of have to be like, well, nothing I can do about that today. Let me focus on what I can affect. I can talk about limited equity co-ops. That's what I can do. And I can build a few of those in my career and hopefully start to move the needle there.
It's so cool to hear though of how you're bridging these different worlds together. And really, and I might have said this before, but it just seems like the more that we can throw spaghetti at the wall to see what sticks, and each time it seems like we gain a little bit more progress, and that's why it's so fun to really explore the myriad of paths into sustainability and regeneration, that it comes from people having such different interests and different passions, and having the courage to step out and to try it.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about the progression of your career. And if people want to continue to follow that progression, Dylan, where should people tune in? Is there a newsletter or a website or something in particular that you'd like to highlight the public towards?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah. My website is cultivateplace.com, and you can always see our projects there. I try to put a lot of information there as well. I do a lot of local advocacy work, and I tend to put all my letters and things like that on my website. I put out a newsletter once a quarter or so that folks can subscribe to. There's a lot of institutions moving the things in the right direction. So I think at the end of the day, folks just follow your passion, and that will, that's the surest way to get to where the greatest opportunity is for you in terms of supporting a more sustainable world.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to the show today. If you want to follow our work at Latitude, you can follow us on Instagram at latitude.regenerative.re, and mine is at I am Neil Collins. We inherently believe in the potential that comes from connecting value-aligned and purpose-driven people together in community. That's why I encourage you to join our mighty network and introduce yourself to the other people working across the globe to advance a more regenerative, resilient, and beautiful world. Here, we want to know what you're working on and what inspires you. Through this platform, you can attend live events, take courses provided by our podcast guests, and create connection with other people and businesses that share your same passion. To join, find the link in our show notes or visit our website at chooselatitude.com. If you'd like to support the show, please share it with your friends and be sure to follow us on your podcast app so that you always have the latest episode downloaded. Another way to support our regenerative field building is to leave us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. Positive ratings help attract amazing guests, and they can be the deciding factor for someone else to tune in and listen. And who knows, maybe this is the kind of motivation that it takes for them to finally decide to align their profession with their sustainable and regenerative values and become a positive force for good within their own community. This show was produced by myself and edited by Anthony Wallace and offered as a part of our work with Latitude Regenerative Real Estate.